What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And I was going to be going over the Nykthos Vampires deck. It's been a while since we've gone over it. There's been a few changes, and of course it is still considered, if not, is one of the best decks in the format, at least one of the best performing decks in the format. But we have a surprising, I wouldn't say challenger, but a surprising appearance from a deck that had basically been dead for a long time, at least since the banning of Karn the Great Creator. So today, we're going to be taking a look at the Nykthos ramp deck for Pioneer and see what it's doing to kind of start getting some more results and stuff in the format. As you can see, this list in particular, the Pioneer Challenge 64 on May 27th, and ended up getting second place with an 8-2 record. That's pretty dang good, in all honesty. So, of course, before we get too deep into the video and we talk about the deck and everything like that, if you're already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more content from me, I post a lot about the Modern and Pioneer formats along with some other longer form videos. So if any of that stuff interests you, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. I'm also currently doing a series on Arena where we essentially make Magic a lot harder than it needs to be by essentially playing a sealed deck, slowly upgrading it with every win, and trying to get to the mythic rank and stuff like that. So if any of that stuff, of course, interests you, subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell, as they're all free, easy ways to support me and my content. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the Nykthos ramp deck, aka Mono Green Devotion. So for those of you that may have kind of come in after, probably in 2024, maybe at the end of 2023, and I mean like the end of 2023, there was this deck called Mono Green Devotion, where essentially you try to play as many cards that have the green mana symbol in them to kind of abuse, we're going to use the word abuse, the ability of Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, which says that you can pay 2 mana and tap the land itself and choose a color. You add mana to your mana pool equal to the amount of mana symbols, or like equal to your devotion, that color. So if you want to have more than like 3 of any given mana symbol among permanents you control to have Nykthos actually generate mana. So, with an Old Growth Troll plus an Elvish Mystic, that's 1 green and then 3 green from here. So, for essentially 3 mana, tapping the land in 2 other mana sort, adding 2 mana, you end up generating 4 mana. So the idea with a deck like this is that Nykthos is going to generate tons of mana, and you're essentially going to ramp yourself by playing some of these other ramp spells. We're counting Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elf, and Wolfwillow Haven as those cards. Now, Mystic and Llanowar Elves just tap for a green mana. Of course, add a green mana symbol to your devotion. You have Wolfwillow Haven that's going to add a green mana symbol to your devotion, and is also going to allow your enchanted land to add an additional green. So this is kind of like the edge case where you can kind of like slap a Wolfwillow Haven on like a forest. It's going to essentially tap for 2 mana, and then like you can use 2 lands essentially to, or 1 land to activate Nykthos. So what these decks used to do is that they had a card called Karn the Great Creator, and their whole sideboard was essentially just combo pieces and things to try to close out the game, but then also, ensure that you were going to have an inevitable combo or whatever, where we would see, the Chain Veil get activated a bunch of times, so that with Kiora and Karn, you'd be able to make sure that you can get Kiora and Karn in your graveyard. Then you go and get like Pestilence Cauldron, you cast the backside, which is Restorative Burst, you can get back your Kiora, get back your Karn, and kind of keep doing that thing. Before they found out they had an infinite combo like that, I guess that's what they would do, but then like when the Chain Veil got added, it just added some crazy consistency to the deck, on top of the fact that it just got to play some big monsters, and it could just absolutely just bludgeon your opponent in like the worst case scenario. In the absolute worst, you never find a card, you're just playing, Old Growth Troll, which is like a 4 mana 4 or a 3 mana 4/4 trampler that then can make another 4/4 once it dies and you get thrown in another land, and it continues to give you devotion as well, because it essentially turns Old Growth Troll into an aura. So you can just slap this on a forest. Your forest is going to be able to tap to add 2 green to your mana pool, which is different from Wolfwillow Haven. If you have an Old Growth Troll and a Wolfwillow Haven on a land, you can tap the land to add 2 green, and then because of Wolfwillow Haven, it's going to add an additional green. So with an Old Growth Troll plus a Wolfville Haven on a forest, you can tap it for 3 green mana. And of course, you're still going to have the devotion from the Old Growth Troll as well, which makes this kind of like a staple of these, devotion decks. Some of the new cards that they have added to the deck, since now we do not have Karn the Great Creator and you don't get this insane, sideboard value and whatnot, is Outcaster Trailblazer. So a 3 mana 4/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you add 1 mana of any color, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. Kiora essentially gets to do the same thing. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. So you essentially get more copies of Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. And with Outcaster Trailblazer 2, you're able to plot this on like turn 2. And then on turn 3, you're able to play the Outcaster. You're going to end up generating a mana from it entering the battlefield. So it's going to be like another way that it can kind of ramp you into some 5s where you can play like a Cavalier Thorns, hopefully find something like a Nykthos. So then the next turn, you have like 3 devotion from the Cavalier, you have 1 from the Trailblazer, and you have 1 from an Elf. You have 5 green mana right there, which is going to help you, burst into something like Storm the Festival and then continue to like draw cards and get advantage with Outcaster Trailblazer. And that's kind of the idea. And then the fact that you can play other Outcaster Trailblazers and it is going to trigger the other Trailblazers and then is also going to add mana when it enters the battlefield to potentially create some scenarios where, you get to play your second Trailblazer, you're going to draw a card off the first one, you're going to generate a mana from this, and then you're going to be able to cast like an Uvenwald Oddity, which is a new card to this deck. Not new in terms of being printed, but new to like the devotion archetype. But then like you're able to follow up into something like this, and then you're going to end up drawing 2 cards, which mono green devotion in a few ways has like struggled. It either before really like the Karn and everything like that, it kind of played like Tron where it was just like hoping to slam a Haymaker. Like you want to draw your Haymakers, and it didn't have access to things like Chromatic Sphere and Chromatic Star like you do in Modern, where you're able to like play the, generate a ton of mana, play these, and the fact that you need a board state too to generate a ton of mana. But the fact that you don't really have things that are going to end up cycling and stuff. Your cycling is, Kiora plus Big Thing, and now Outcaster Trailblazer plus Big Thing. But now with how the deck is set up, we see that you have like Trailblazers, Old Growth Troll, Uvenwald Oddity, which can like flip into Uvenwald Behemoth, with like Trample Haste. I mean, like a 4 mana 4/4 Trample Haste is pretty good. It's like a very aggressive card because again, like you play an Old Growth Troll on 2, play this on 3. You're attacking with 8 trampling power on turn 3, which is pretty good and puts a lot of pressure on your opponent. And you're able to flip it over for 7 mana, which is pretty easy to do with the amount of mana that you have and the amount of mana you can generate with your devotion. You're going to be able to flip it, and then other creatures you're controlling have +1/+1 trample and haste, which is going to make your Cavaliers, future Old Growth Trolls, and even like the Outcaster Trailblazers a lot better attackers. I mean, like a 5/3 trampler is insane. Even if you end up trading these off, like your opponent's probably going to be dead or almost dead and have like 0 board state, to try to recover from. And really the only decks that I would have any confidence of coming back with absolutely no board state would be something like Amalia that has like a Return to the Ranks set up, and they're able to get back at least like 3 creatures because then they can do their combo. But outside of like that scenario, I don't have a lot of confidence in those decks that are also playing creatures that want to kill you by combat, beating mono green in combat, really, given like how much power that the deck has. Another card that is very powerful in the deck is Storm the Festival. And aside from other Storm the Festivals, which you really wouldn't even be able to hit necessarily from, Storm the Festival, you can put, you look at 5 cards from your library, look at the top 5, put 2 permanent cards with mana value 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you can find 2 Cavalier Thorns, put them into play. You're going to be able to look at, 5 cards to get a land, another 5 cards to get a land, add 6 devotion and 10 power to the board, which more than likely is going to draw you, 2 for however many, Outcaster Trailblazers or Kiora Behemoth Beckoners you have in play. Uh, this has been a very powerful effect. We would see, mono green devotion decks play this on turn 3 or turn 4, what have you. Best case scenario, like turn 3, and you storm the festival, and you would find like Karn, you'd find Kiora, and then you'd kind of be able to do your thing, be able to generate a ton of mana, flash this back, and be able to get even more value from it. Hopefully find Cavaliers, which will find you Nykthoses, which will end up generating you a lot more mana to then get to the point where you can combo. And in this deck, it's kind of like the same idea where you're going to cast a Storm, you're going to trying to find like a Cavalier and some other like high devotion things to put into play, draw cards from Trailblazer and Kiora, flashback of Storm the Festival, maybe play a Storm the Festival from your hand, and just kind of keep things rolling. So, this deck snowballs incredibly well. Of course, too, a card that I've been neglecting to point out because of my disdain for it is Leyline of the Guild Pack. So if it's the beginning of the game and it's in your opening hand, you can put it on the battlefield. And your non-land permanents you control are all colors, and lands are every basic land type in addition to other types. This deck, from a quick look around, doesn't really care. I guess you can tap a forest for blue mana to cast your Kiora, but then you could also kind of do the same thing with Oath of Nissa, where your Nykthos or whatever could tap for colored mana to play your Kiora or whatever. But this card doesn't this deck isn't really using this in the ways that 4 and 5 color decks are using this, where we see domain decks in Modern playing it. It provides 4 green mana symbols for your Nykthos. So on turn 2, you're able to play an Elvish Mystic on 1, follow it up with a Nykthos, and right there's 5 mana. You have a Cavalier of Thorns on turn 2. When your opponent is playing a tap land, what have you. It is virtually a mulligan because it is something that comes into play, and really aside from the devotion, it's not going to really do much for you. But being an enchantment, it's relatively hard to interact with, at least super early in the game. So if you are able to slam a Cavalier Thorns, maybe play an Uvenwald Oddity and then flip it on the next turn or whatever. Because again, you play this, you have 5 mana on turn 2, so you're able to play this, and then you're going to have 7 mana on the next turn, assuming no one messes with your Elvish Mystics, and you're going to have an 8/8 that you're going to be able to attack with, and potentially produce even more mana if you have other Nykthoses, which, in the best case scenario, you flip this, and then you play another Nykthos, and then you're able to slam a Cavalier Thorns. That's 6/8, that's 14 power coming across on turn 3. There's not a lot of decks that can beat that. Sideboard, we have Pick Your Poison. Just a good answer to some of the stuff from the Rakdos Vampires deck. Of course, a way of getting around the ward on something like a Vein Ripper. You have Sylvan Caryatids. I'm assuming this is if you just need more dorks, this is just going to be something your opponent really can't interact with. The Stone Brain's interesting. I'm assuming this is kind of obviously to attack some of the other combo based decks, where you can just kind of bring it in. You can name some cards and tear your opponent's combo pieces out of their hand. This was a lot better with Karn the Great Creator, since it exiles itself, that you could just have one copy and then you were able to Karn to get it back and just continue to activate Stonebrain until your opponent was essentially milled out. Voracious Hydra was a card that very early builds of Mono Green played, and it looks like it has kind of made its way back, even if it is in the sideboard rather than in the main 60. Just getting to, come into play with X counters on it, and you either double the amount of counters or it fights creature you don't control. So it's a removal spell when you need it, and then is just a very, very, very big threat. If you have X equals 5, a 7 mana, 5/6, that ends up being a 10/11, on whatever turn, we talked about having 5 mana on turn 2, being able to cast a Voracious Hydra, super huge, pair it with an Uvenwald Oddity transformed. That's going to end up being nearly a game winner, if not a game winner. Obstinate Baloth, a way to gain life. If your opponent has a spell or ability that causes you to discard Baloth, you put it on the battlefield instead. So pretty good against a mono black, where if they play a Liliana, and this is something that happened in Modern, a long time ago, where people would plus Liliana and then they would just put an Obstinate Baloth into play. And, essentially the Liliana is going to go down because conveniently it takes up to 4 loyalty, and Baloth is going to be able to attack it down. Or if you want to bait your opponent into plussing it again, if you have another Baloth in hand, is pretty neat. Chances are they probably just take their losses and snipe the Baloth with the Edict ability. But, you never know. People get greedy. They don't think about it. And, surely they're not going to have a second one, and then you have a second Baloth. Cityscape Leveler, Emrakul, the Promised End. Two, high end. Notably don't have any green devotion symbols, but I mean, these cards are just absolute slam dunk home runs when they come into play. I mean, Leveler is going to blow up. You know, when you cast a spell and when it attacks, you're going to destroy up to one target non-land permanent. Its opponent's going to create a tap Power Stone token. Most decks aren't going to be able to use the Power Stone token for mana, so you're essentially just getting a free removal spell whenever you cast or attack with Cityscape. Leveler has Unearth for the same mana cost, where as long as you get to attack with it, you're going to get to blow something up. Emrakul, the Promised End, is easily one of the hardest cards to play with if you've never played with this type of effect. It costs one less for each card type among cards in your graveyard, and then when you cast it, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn, and then they get an additional turn after. And then this card has Flying Trample, protection from instants. This can easily just decimate your opponent's board and force them into some pretty awkward scenarios, like when they untap, where they essentially have like no resources. Like you get a 13/13, and your opponent's like whole board state is absolutely ruined. And there's like tons of videos from like Pro Tour Eldritch Moon of like players like playing Emrakul, the Promised End. And I'm sure like plenty of other matches in like Modern and things like that, where Emrakul, the Promised End, just absolutely destroys someone's board state, and like it's like nearly impossible to like win from that point. So yeah, that is Mono Green Devotion / Nykthos ramp for the Pioneer format. This deck is slowly making a comeback. Is it going to be like the tier 1 powerhouse that, you know, we've kind of known it to become, you know, in previous times? No, I don't think that it has. I mean, it definitely has the punch. Just if there's like enough consistency, because it's kind of relying on your opponent not being able to interact with it, and of course with, you know, the Nykthos Vampires decks essentially playing like 4 full copies of Fatal Push, you know, playing Bitter Triumph, and then you have the other side where you have Is It Phoenix that's playing a lot of, you know, the not Fiery Temper. They're playing a lot of like 1 mana removal in their decks, and you know, this deck really wants its Elvish Mystics, Land Nowhere Elves to survive, so it can go Old Growth Troll, or, you know, in like the Dreamland where you go Leyline into like Elvish Mystic into like Cavalier Thorns, whatever. You know, if it gets those starts, this deck is pretty powerful, and I would imagine is pretty hard to beat if you are not something like a Amalia deck and you're not facing down the absolute like nut aggressive draw from Mono Green. But, you know, there's definitely a lot of the consistency issues kind of fixed, and you know, again, I think this is like an appropriate power level for Mono Green in the Pioneer format. So that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video, comment down below if there's another Pioneer deck that you would like to see next, as we kind of, you know, get into the twilight times of the, you know, our Pioneer RCQ season, and as Modern kind of gets closer with the release of Modern Horizons 3 and whatnot. So that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.